Hello everyone, welcome to video 5 of Indian Economy Advanced series. In this video, we will discuss the Union Budget 2025-26. The reading recommendation for this video is chapter 9 of Indian Economy Handbook, that is the chapter on public finance. All right, let's get started. So we know that the term budget is not mentioned in the Constitution of India. Instead, the term that is mentioned is annual financial statement. Now, when we hear the words annual financial statement, it feels like it is a list of receipts and expenditures of the government. But of course, the budget is much more than that. The union budget reflects the government's economic priorities. It is also a response to the prevailing challenges of the Indian economy. Okay, so whatever challenges the Indian economy has been facing in near term and in long term, it is a government's response to that. And it is also a roadmap for the country's economic future. So, to properly understand the union budget, you should have an understanding of the global and domestic context that shapes the government's fiscal policy. Of course, the union budget is the expression of government's fiscal policy. All right. So first we'll look at the global challenges that is faced by the country and the domestic challenges, and we'll see how the government's budget has been a response to that. Okay. Now we have already discussed, even in this advanced series, all the global headwinds that the global economy has been facing. Okay. So of course, a lot of global headwinds, global challenges, global economic challenges. Of course, the first one is the geopolitical tensions that has been there in different parts of the world, which has also led to a lot of trade disruptions. So there is the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the Israel-Hamas war, so the various conflicts in the Middle East, also various instances of cyber attacks. Particularly, you'll see a lot of cyber attacks happening um, by China or even USA. So that is disrupting a lot of trade. Then there is also disruption of trade routes that is happening, particularly the Suez Canal and also the Panama Canal trade disruptions has happened due to climatic uh, changes. And in Suez Canal, of course, there's been the attack of Houthi rebels in the Red Sea. So, because of all these, of course, these are challenges to the global economy, various geopolitical tensions and trade disruptions. At the same time, the global economy has also witnessed a weakness in the global manufacturing. Okay. Because the global economy has not been doing so well. There has been a lack of demand, and this has reflected in the global manufacturing. There has been a slowdown in manufacturing in Europe and Asia. Now, if we talk about the inflationary pressure, so in the earlier video, when we were discussing inflation, we saw that how there was synchronized monetary tightening by various central banks of advanced economies, particularly USA and the European countries. So if we talk about the inflationary pressure, of course, the inflation has come down due to the tighter policies, but there at the same time now there is policy uncertainty. So different countries have taken different path with respect to their monetary policies and fiscal policies. At the same time, the energy prices is still elevated and the shipping disruptions is still there. So the shipping disruption has cost added cost to that cost of transportation, and that has led to increase in prices. So inflationary pressure is there due to that also, and divergence in the central bank policies of various countries. So that is the situation with respect to inflation. Now, because of all these factors, there has also been financial market volatility. Okay. So overall uncertainty, what is going to be the policy of USA, what is going to be the policy of European countries. Uh, so they did synchronize monetary tightening, but now their policies have diverged. Now this has led to volatility because uncertain in case of uncertainty, always the investors would like to park their money in safe haven, and these safe havens are advanced economies, particularly the USA economy, and therefore at least the emerging markets have seen a lot of volatility in their financial market. So investors have moved to safe haven assets like US treasuries, gold, US dollars. Now, another important global headwind is the climate shock that different countries are experiencing, which has led to the price volatility of the commodities, particularly agricultural commodities, but other metal commodities also. So, extreme weather effects have affected agricultural and commodity supply. So, this is the situation of the global economy. Now, let's see the situation of the domestic economy. Okay. Now, domestic economy, we know that India has been the fastest growing large economy. But despite the strong macroeconomic stability that the country has experienced for quite some time now, the GDP growth experienced a slowdown. Okay, so the GDP growth rate was 8.2% in financial year 24. It decreased to 6.4% in financial year 25. So there was a slowdown in the GDP growth rate. Now, if we see about consumption, and consumption is very important because consumption is the largest contributor to the country's GDP, right? So consumption remains very important. Now, if we see the consumption, the rural consumption has been robust because of a strong agricultural performance. The rural consumption rebounded, but there is signs of moderation or uh, slowdown in urban consumption. So, urban consumption, which is generally measured through the number of automobiles that is bought or the number of fast moving consumer goods that is being bought. So, urban consumption has not been very strong. Okay. Now, if we talk about investment, the next biggest contributor to the GDP of the country is, we know, is investment. Now, investment, the government investment has been quite robust for some time now. The government has been spending a lot of money in capital expenditure, but the private sector capital expenditure has not kept up. Okay. And this is particularly due to global economic situations also. So there is global uncertainties which has dampened the investor confidence. They do not want to invest in this economy. At the same time, because the central bank, the RBI had increased the interest rate, so the cost of borrowing was high, which reduced the long-term investment appeal. So the investment has not been doing quite well. At the same time, even the domestic manufacturing sector, so we saw that the global manufacturing sector has not been performing well. This effect has been felt by the domestic manufacturing sector also because of weak global demand. So the global demand is weak. At the same time, various sectors which are more export driven has been hit by the trade policy changes in major economies. So you'll see that many of the major economies have making changes in their trade policy. Particularly, you'll see USA um, putting high tariffs on Indian goods. So that has led to challenges for the manufacturing sector also. If we talk about inflation, inflation has been in control in the because of high interest rates of RBI. Inflation was brought under control, but still there is challenges in the food prices. Okay, so the food prices depends on various other factors, also particularly dependent on monsoon and the climate. So therefore, the food prices volatility has existed. At the same time, if we talk about employment and wage growth, we'll see that the employment in the private sector and the wage growth in the private sector has remained sluggish, which means it has not performed well. Even you must have seen in the news articles in the newspapers, there were mass layoffs by major companies. So overall, the employment has been relatively high and the wage growth has not risen, and therefore it has impacted the consumption. Okay, so people don't have too much disposable income in their hand, and therefore the consumption has also been sluggish. So this is the situation of the domestic economy. So we saw the situation of the global economy, the domestic economy. Now in this context, the government has presented the union budget. So let's see what is the what are our expectations from the government from the union budget. So even before the government presents the union budget, various policymakers or economists or industry leaders will discuss and have expectations from the government. They want the government to take various policy decisions so as to help the economy. Okay. So what was the expectations of what were the various expectations from the government? Number one, of course, we want the government to build fiscal buffers. By building fiscal buffers, we mean that we want the government to lower the fiscal deficit and lower the debt to GDP ratio. Now, this will give our economy certain wiggle room if the economy faces certain challenges. At least the government will have certain room or space to do more borrowing. Now, if already the fiscal deficit is high or debt to GDP ratio is high, the government will not be able to borrow money from the market to spend in the economy. So it is very important to keep fiscal buffers so that come emergent situation, the government, for example, a COVID like situation or even a situation that is less severe than COVID, the government should be able to borrow money, and therefore very important to build fiscal buffers. It also provides a certain level of stability to the economy. So this is for one of the expectations from the government. Then there is another expectation from the government to take certain steps to boost private sector investment. Okay, because the government sector investment alone is not enough for achieving high rates of GDP growth. The private sector investment also has to be boosted, and for that, the government should may take certain reforms, encourage more investment by the private sector. Then the government should also be doing something to enhance consumption and demand in the economy. Okay, so how do you increase consumption and demand in the economy? By bringing more money in the hands of the people. So people will have more disposable income, and therefore this will lead to more demand in the economy and more consumption in the economy. Then, of course, the government should also take few steps to contain inflation and particularly food inflation. Okay. Then few steps should be is expected to strengthen the manufacturing sector and the export sector because these are very crucial sectors for the growth of Indian growth of the economy, and these are the sectors which has also been facing maximum challenges due to volatile global economy. So few um, reforms or few steps, a few announcements is also expected here. And then, of course, the government should take certain policy decisions to bring in long term, to ensure long term growth of the economy by bringing certain structural reforms. So these are the expectations from the government even before the government has announced the budget. So in this context, we'll look at what are the various decisions, what are the various announcements made by the government in the union budget 2025-26. All right. So we all know that the budget is announced on 1st of February every year. So the 1st of February 2025, our Honorable Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman announced the union budget for the next financial year, that is the financial year 25-26, the financial year in which we are right now. Now, let's talk about the theme. So every budget will have a broad theme around which the government will make various announcements. So this is the theme of the Union Budget 25-26. The vision of the government is to achieve a status of Viksit Bharat or a status of a developed nation by 2047. Okay. And this budget, the government also uh, put forward certain goals that will be achieved, which is the vision of the government with Viksit Bharat. So Viksit Bharat is not something in air. When the government says Viksit Bharat, these are the things that the government wants to achieve. Number one is zero poverty. So by 2047, government wants to achieve zero poverty. Okay. Right now, the poverty rate is around 10 to 11%. The government wants to bring it down to single digits and then to zero by 2047. So extra eradication of extreme poverty across India. Then the second goal with respect to Viksit Bharat is 100% quality education. The government wants to achieve 100% education, universal access to good quality school education, then universal health care, proper health care, primary, secondary, and tertiary health care should be available to all the population, high quality, affordable, comprehensive healthcare for all. Then 100% skill workforce. So every person in the workforce should be properly skilled so as to achieve meaningful employment. Okay, so 100% skilling has to be done. Then the women's economic participation, so the female labor force participation rate has to be increased to 70%. Okay, so right now it is right around 47%. It has to be increased to 70%. And the sixth goal is to make India a global food basket. So the farmers has to be empowered to make India the food basket of the world. So these are the goals of these are the long-term goals of the government. Okay. Now next, once the long-term goals of the government is set, the government has identified four key demography in which to focus our efforts on. Okay, so which are these four key demographics? Number one is the poor. Okay, Garib or the poor. Now, why it is very important to focus on the poor? Because these are the most disadvantaged people in the country. Our poverty rate in 2013-14 was 29.17%. It has decreased to 11.28% in 2022-23. But still, India has the largest number of poor people in the world, and therefore it is very important to bring them out of poverty. And also, with respect to our vision of Viksit Bharat, we want to achieve zero poverty by 2047. Now, we are also committed to the SDG goals. So, as per the SDG goals, we have to uh, reduce by half the number of poor people by 2030. So these are the goals that we are committed to, and therefore this is a very key demographic that the government should focus its efforts on. The second key demographic is the youth. Now, again, why it's so important to focus on the youth? Because in the Indian economy wants to take benefit of the demographic dividend. Now, you all know what demographic dividend is. Is that the uh, people in the workforce, the proportion of people in the workforce is much more as compared to the dependent population, that is the children and the elderly. Now, this will give rise to more consumption, more saving, more investment, and overall very high rates of economic growth. So, therefore, very important to focus on the youth. Our median age right now is 28.4 years, which is a very young population as compared to some of the advanced countries. But for this young population, we have to provide proper skilling and then also provide them meaningful jobs. So we need to create 78.5 lakh new non-farm jobs annually till 2030. So again, this is a very important thing that we have to achieve if we want to take advantage of our demographic dividend. The third key demography is the farmers or the Annadata. And again, very important to focus on this key demographic because um, um, the agricultural sector accounts for 46.1% of the workforce. Okay, so almost half the workforce is engaged in agriculture, but still the contribution of agriculture is pretty low. Uh, Compared to that, only 16% of the GDP is contributed or by the agricultural sector, and therefore this becomes a very key demographic because it is important for food security of the country, but at the same time almost half of our workforce involved here, so we have to ensure to increase the productivity of the farmers, and at the same time we have to ensure that people who are moving out of the agriculture sector, they also find meaningful jobs. And the fourth important demography is the women. Okay, now the women are 50% of the population. Their female labor force participation rate right now is 47.1% as per the periodic labor force survey report of 23-24. Now this we already have seen that this we want to increase to 70% by 2047. Okay, so the goal is to raise it to 70%. And it again, if India wants to become a developed country, then it is very important that half the population, which is the women, also participate in the workforce and contribute to the economic growth of the country. So these are the four key demographics. Now, next, the government in the union budget talks about the four engines of growth. Now, these are the four key sectors, four key economic areas from which the major growth of the Indian economy is going to come from. Okay, so these are going to be the key drivers of India's development. The first sector the government talks about, the first engine of growth, is agriculture. Now, the agriculture, of course, we have already talked about, is very important. Employs 46% of the workforce, contributes 16% of the GDP, and is very critical for income of these 46% of the workforce, with jobs and food security. Now, the second engine of growth is the micro, small, and medium enterprises. Again, a very, very important sector of the Indian economy. It contributes, after agriculture, the second highest contribution to the GDP. Around 30% of the GDP comes from the MSMEs, provides 41% of the manufacturing output. So we have already seen that, we have already discussed that one of the expectations from the government is to boost manufacturing in the country. So by giving an impetus to MSMEs, more manufacturing output will be achieved. It also accounts for 45% of exports, employs the largest number of people after agriculture. So 20.5 crore people are right now registered in Udyam registration and assist platform. So very high number of workforce are involved in micro, small, and medium enterprise, and it is the backbone of jobs and inclusive growth in the country. So this is the second engine of growth. The third engine of growth is investments. Okay. So more investment. Now this also we have discussed. This is also one of the expectations from the government, that more investment will be brought to the economy. So through this engine of growth, the government will give more impetus to investment in people, investment in economy, and investment in innovation. Why investment in people? Because these are the human capital and very important for increased productivity of the economy. Now, right now, our education spending is 4.6% of GDP, whereas the National Education Policy 2020 has given a target of 6% of GDP. So the expenditure on education has to be increased. The health expenditure right now is around 2% of GDP, whereas the National Health Policy of 2017 gives a target of 2.5% of GDP. So more health expenditure is also required. Now, investment in economy by investment in infrastructure. Why is it so important to invest in infrastructure? Because better the infrastructure, greater the infrastructure, more is going to be the economic capacity of the country. So it leads to multiplier effect. So more economic activity will lead to also more jobs, more private investment, more growth. So overall, investment in economy is very important, and investment in innovation. Okay, now investment in innovation is right now around 0.7% of GDP, which is very low compared to other advanced countries and even emerging markets. The global average of investment in innovation or investment in research and development is around more than 2%. So we need more research and development in our country. Also, it has been proven that per unit of expenditure in R&D gives a multiplied effect on the economy. So the economy grows by a much higher rate when we spend in research and development. And it is also important for tech-driven growth of the economy. So these investments are the third engine of growth for our economy. And the fourth engine of growth is going to be exports. Okay. Now exports constitute about 22.6% of GDP and imports contribute 25% of GDP. Now we already know that the formula for calculating GDP is C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So X minus M is exports minus import. So import actually is subtracted from the GDP. So overall, from our international trade, has a negative impact on our GDP. So we want to increase the exports. Therefore, we want to increase exports, right? So boosting exports will help balance trade deficit and also drive growth and bring in more demand in the economy and will lead to more production. So that is why exports is also important and it is going to act as the fourth engine of growth. Okay, so as you can see, these are the four engines of growth: agriculture, MSME, investment, and exports. Now, the government says that these engine of growth will require fuel. Okay, and where will this fuel come from? This fuel will come in the form of reforms. So the government will bring in various kinds of reforms which will give rise to more productivity in agriculture, MSME, investment, and exports. And the guiding spirit of all these reforms that the government is going to bring is going to be inclusivity, which means that the fruits of these reforms that the government will bring should accrue to all sections of society. ऐसा नहीं है कि सिर्फ elite section corner or the benefits and rest of the people don't get any benefit. The guiding spirit is going to be inclusivity, which also is there in the motto of the government, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. So the government wants to achieve the status of Viksit Bharat through the contribution and benefit of everyone. So the growth should be inclusive. And the destination, of course, we have talked about the destination is Viksit Bharat, or the status of a developed country by 2047. And these are the four demographics we have already discussed that the government is going to focus on: the poor, the youth, the farmers, and the women. So these were the theme of the budget. Now let's see what are the different how much receipts and how much expenditure the government want to do in this financial year 25-26. So we already know the structure of the budget. The budget is broadly divided into revenue budget and capital budget. And again, revenue budget is divided into revenue receipts and revenue expenditure. Okay, and capital budget is divided into capital receipts and capital expenditure. Now you see that the most of the receipts of the government, that is incoming money, is going to come from revenue receipts. Why is that? Because revenue receipts is again broadly divided into tax revenue and non-tax revenue receipts. So tax revenue, of course, is the biggest source of income for the government, which is going to be 28.4. So this is the target of the government for the financial year 2025-26. 28.4 lakh crore. Non-tax revenue is going to be 5.8 lakh crore, which makes the revenue receipt 34.2 lakh crore. And the capital receipts, the capital receipts is again broadly divided into debt capital receipts and non-debt. Debt capital receipts are the money that the government borrows, okay, which is a significant chunk, 50.6 lakh crore. The government is going to borrow from both from domestic and external sources, and non-debt capital receipts is generally the disinvestment proceeds of the government. So if the government will suppose do disinvestment in some PSUs or sell off some of its assets, so that is um, not much, 0.8 lakh crore. So overall, you will see that the total revenue of the total receipts of the government from both revenue receipts and capital receipts is 34.2 lakh crore plus 16.4 lakh crore is equal to 50.6 lakh crore. Okay, so this is the budget outlay. This is the total receipt that the government expects to collect in this financial year. Now, if we talk about the revenue expenditure, which is the day-to-day recurring expenditures of the government, like the expenditures on salaries, pensions, defense, all these expenditures are there. Subsidies. So that is 39.4 lakh crore. And the capital expenditure is considered to be the productive expenditures of the government. So these are the expenditures on capital assets like building roads or railways, airports, warehouses, hospitals, schools. So this is 11.2 lakh crore. So you'll again see that even the expenditure 39.4 lakh crore plus 11.2 lakh crore is 50.6 lakh crore. So this is how the receipts and the expenditure is matched. Now, if we see the trends of this, if we talk about where the receipt is going to come from, the maximum receipt the government earns is from the tax revenues, right? So the tax revenue receipts, 22% is going to come from income tax, which is the largest tax revenue source. Then 18% is GST and other indirect taxes. 17% is corporation tax. 5% is the union excise duty, and 4% is the custom duty. So these are all the tax revenues of the government. Apart from that, borrowing and other liabilities is another very big chunk, 24%, which is the debt capital receipts of the government. And then non-tax receipts is 9% and non-debt capital receipts is around 1%. So this is where the government is going to collect money from. These are the sources. And if we talk about where are the government going to spend this money, then you see around 22% of the money is going to go to states. So states have a share in the central pool of taxes. So 22% is going to the states. Then another 20% is going to be paid as interest payments. So the borrowings that the government did in earlier years, so उसके लिए interest देना पड़ता है. The government has to pay interest every year. So the 20% is going to go as just as interest. Then 16% will be spent on central sector schemes, 6% on subsidies, 8% on defense. Then another 8% will be the finance commission transfers. So the finance commission also recommends to transfer some money to state. So that is going to be 8%. 8% on centrally sponsored scheme. Okay. Centrally sponsored schemes may 8% and other expenditures, pensions is 4% and other expenditures are 8%. So this is where the government is going to spend the money in the financial year 25-26. Now, if we talk about the trend of capital expenditure, and this is very important, we see that there is a very rising trend with respect to capital expenditure. Now, capital expenditure is considered to be the most productive expenditure of the government, and therefore, everyone recommends that the government spend more and more on capital expenditure. And through this trend, we see that the government has been spending money on capital expenditure. However, one of the challenges for the government is also to bring in more private sector expenditure, private sector capital expenditure, which has not been very robust. However, the government capital expenditure has been quite robust. Okay. Now here you can see the trends with respect to various deficits. Okay. Now, when we were discussing the expectations from the government in the budget, one of the expectations was that the government will create a proper fiscal buffer. Now, with proper fiscal buffer, it is expected that the government will work to reduce the fiscal deficit and other deficits and also reduce the debt to GDP ratio, so that in case of any emergency, at least there is some room for the government to borrow more money from the internal and external sources. Okay, so we see that right around this year, of course, this was an exceptional COVID year in which the government had to borrow a lot of money and therefore the deficit increased. But after that, the government has been following a path of fiscal consolidation. And in 25-26, the government aims to bring in fiscal deficit to 4.4%. Okay. And similarly, other deficits has also reduced. So this means that the government is following fiscal consolidation, which is good. Okay. Now, if we see the trend of debt to GDP ratio, then we also see that the debt to GDP ratio has also been decreasing. Of course, this was the COVID year when the government accumulated a lot of debt, but after that, the debt to GDP ratio has been decreasing. Okay. Now, another announcement that the government has made, which I think is very crucial and very important, is that the government is going to shift to debt to GDP ratio as a fiscal anchor. So till now, the fiscal anchor or the targets of the government was in terms of reducing fiscal deficit. Okay. So every year the government would set a target for itself to reduce the fiscal deficit. So fiscal deficit was the operational target. Now the government has decided that we will not actively try to reduce fiscal deficit, but we will try to reduce the debt to GDP ratio of um, the debt to GDP ratio of the country. तो वो reduce करना है, and the target that the government has now set for itself is to bring the debt to GDP ratio to 50% plus minus 1% by 2031. So this will ensure a long-term fiscal stability. Right now, it is 56.1%. All right. Now, let's one by one look at what are the various announcements made by the government in various sectors. Now, we'll quickly go through it because these are the announcements that the government, so these are only just announcements, and throughout the financial year, the government will keep on coming with various schemes that were announced in the budget. Okay, so let's start with the first engine of growth, that is agriculture, and a lot of announcements were made by the government in the agricultural sector. So there will be Pradhan Mantri Dhan Dhan Krishi Yojana, where the government will plan to cover 100 districts, will develop 100 agriculture districts in the country. Then enhanced credit for KCC, mission for cotton production, national mission for high yielding seeds, Makhana board in Bihar. So these are the various announcements, and therefore I'll quickly go through them. Uh, I don't think we will spend too much time here because again next year you'll have a new budget which you'll have to study. But let's quickly go through what are the various announcements that was made by the government um, in this year's budget. Okay, so again a scheme for Atmanirbharta in pulses. So uh, pulses like tur, urad, masoor. With this, will have climate resilient seeds, increased protein content, post-harvest storage. Then India Post will be used as a catalyst for rural economy for doing direct benefit transfer. So India Post is the post offices, those could leverage किया जाएगा for direct benefit transfer, credit services, insurance, etc. So to provide various financial services to the rural people. Then with respect to the second engine of growth, the MSMEs. So what were the various announcements made by the government here? So a credit card will be introduced for micro enterprises, scheme for first time entrepreneurs, particularly women, scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, who will be provided a term loan of up to 2 crore. Then a manufacturing missions. So one of the expectations is to boost manufacturing. So there will be a manufacturing mission which will focus on ease of doing business, future ready workforce, MSME, technology, clean tech. Then measures for labor intensive sectors. So these labor intensive sectors are very important for creating more number of jobs. Okay, so there will be schemes for footwear, leather sector, toy sector, food processing sector, more focus on made in India brand. Then this is very important. There has been a reclassification of criteria of MSMEs. Okay, so earlier criteria was uh, in investment up to 1 crore investment and 5 crore turnover was identified as micro enterprise. Now in the revised criteria, 2.5 crore investment and 10 crore turnover will be identified as micro enterprise. Similarly, for small enterprises and medium enterprises, the criteria has been increased so that more and more number of enterprises can identify themselves as MSMEs, and once they identify as a MSME, they become eligible for more benefits from the government. All right. Now, with respect to the third engine of growth, that is investment. So these are the various announcements made for investment in people. For example, Saksham Anganwadi and Poshan 2.0. Poshan 2.0 is midday meal schemes, right? So meals will be provided to school children and uh, pregnant women and lactating mothers. Then expansion capacity of IITs, daycare, cancer center, Bharatiya Bhasha Pustak scheme, where the Indian language books will be digitalized. National Center for Excellence for Skilling will be set up. Atal Tinkering Labs will be set up in various schools. Then another National Center for Excellence in Artificial Intelligence for Education will be set up. Broadband connectivity in secondary schools, primary health centers, expansions of medical education for more number of medical seats. PM Swanidhi for street vendors, welfare of online platform workers. Um, there will be registration on eShram portal and healthcare under PM Jan Arogya Yojana. So these online platform workers, like those who work for Zomato, Swiggy, or Uber or Urban Company, those type of platforms, even they will have some sort of social security. Then for investment in economy, there will be support given to states for creation of infrastructure. Jal Jeevan Mission 2.0 with 100% coverage aim will till 2028. There are some power sector reforms that will be done. Asset monetization plan, urban challenge fund for proposals for cities as growth hubs for creative redevelopment of cities, sanitation, water and sanitation of cities. So the various public facilities will be provided in various cities. Okay. And then a maritime development fund, nuclear energy mission for Viksit Bharat, Udan scheme for regional connectivity through air. Some schemes for Bihar, Swami Fund will be provided. Then various announcements is made for encouraging more tourism in the country. So top 50 tourist destinations will be developed. E-visa facilities, skill development of people who are there in the maybe tourism sector or hotels, restaurants. So skill development will be done to them. Then Mudra loans will be provided to homestays, ease of travel, ease of more connectivity. Then for investment in innovation, a PM research fellowship where will be developed, gene bank for crops, germplasm. So this will enhance the productivity in the agricultural sector. A Gyan Bharatam mission for documentation and conservation of our manuscript heritage. research development and innovation, private sector driven research and development. So more and more private sector will be encouraged to invest in R&D. Right now most of the investment in R&D comes from the government, so the government also wants the private sector to invest in R&D. If you'll see in the advanced economies, most of the investment in research and development comes from private sector. So that should happen in India also. Then a mission for National Geospatial Mission, which will lead to modernization of land records, urban planning, design of infrastructure projects. Then the fourth engine of growth is export. So what is the various announcement of the government to promote export? There will be a export promotion mission, Bharat Trade Net, which will be a digital public infrastructure for international trade. Then a national framework for global capability centers in emerging tier 2 cities. Warehouse facility for air cargo. This will be developed so as to air cargo will also be used for high value perishable horticulture produce. Okay. Now these were the four engines of growth. Now to power these engines of growth, what is required? Fuel is required, and the fuel will come in the form of various reforms that the government will bring in. Okay. So these are the various financial sector reforms, like a Grameen credit score will be developed, which will give credit, which will serve the credit needs of the SHG members. So the self-help group members will get a Grameen credit score, and on the basis of that Grameen credit score, they will be able to take loans from banks. Okay. Then NAFED will set up a partial credit enhancement facility for corporate bonds for infrastructure. There will be revamped central KYC registry. So the KYC will be made more user friendly. Speedy approval of company mergers. The FDI limit in insurance sector will be raised. So more FDI, these insurance sector can attract more FDI. Then there are also tax reforms proposed by the government. For example, the government is bringing the new income tax bill. Then some regulatory reforms also. For example, there will be an investment friendliness index of states, so that there is healthy competition between states to become more investor friendly. Okay. A Jan Vishwas bill to decriminalize more than 100 provisions in various laws. So these are the various reforms that the government aims to bring. Some indirect tax proposals are also there. Rationalization of custom tariff for industrial goods. So now there will be no more than one cess or surcharge that will be applied to these industrial goods. So that is rationalization. That is more ease. That means more ease of doing business, right? Then there to improve the access or to life-saving medicines, some of these medicines will be kept in the exempt list so that no custom duties will be charged on them. Now there are also direct tax proposals. Now in fact this was one of the most talked about reform proposal of the government. So the government has changed the personal income tax slabs. So this was the earlier tax slab, which was lower, 0 to 3 lakh, 3 to 7 lakh. Now the new income tax slab is higher, right? 0 to 4 lakh, 4 to 8 lakh, 8 to 12 lakh. And this will reduce the tax liability of the taxpayers so that they will have more income, disposable income in their hand. So when we studied, when we were looking at the expectations from the government, one of the expectations was that the government will do something to increase the demand and consumption in the economy. So through this direct tax proposal, direct income tax proposal, the government will reduce the tax liabilities, tax burden on the people, taxpayers, and therefore they will have more money in their hand, and they will do more consumption and also increase the demand in the economy. All right. So you see that earlier income up to 7 lakh was not required to pay any tax. The government has increased it to 12 lakh. So if you have an income till 12 lakh, whatever is your income tax liability, that will be foregone by the government. So that rebate will be given by the government. And if you have income till 12 lakh, you don't have to pay any tax. And if you're a salaried individual, you'll not pay any tax for income up to 12.75 lakh because you'll get a standard deduction of 75,000. Okay. All right. So this was everything with respect to the union budget of 2025-26. Now let's once again look at what was the expectation from the government from the union budget, and was the government able to fulfill those expectations, right? So the first expectation was to build fiscal buffers, and the government fulfilled this by decreasing the fiscal deficit and decreasing the debt to GDP ratio. So this, the government took certain decisions to fulfill this expectation. Now, another expectation was to boost private sector investment, and we saw that the government brought in did various announcements and various reforms to boost private sector investments, both in R&D and otherwise also. Now, to enhance consumption and demand, which means the government must bring in more disposable income in the hands of the people, and the government did this by reducing the income tax. Okay, so by reducing the income tax, people will have more disposable income, and that will lead to more consumption and more demand in the economy. Various steps were taken by the government, both short term and long term, to contain inflation. Okay. So again, by reducing the fiscal deficit, debt to GDP ratio, government reduced the amount of borrowing it did. At the same time, various reforms were brought in the particularly agricultural sector, which is primarily responsible for food inflation. So even steps were taken to contain inflation. Then again, strengthening manufacturing and strengthening exports. Manufacturing through more focus on MSMEs and exports, because the fourth engine of growth. So a lot of steps were taken for strengthening both exports and manufacturing. And of course, various structural reforms were taken too for long-term growth of the economy. So by and large, the government was able to fulfill the expectations in this union budget. All right, so that's it for this video. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.